Chapter 241. Aubry only wanted to know if Lucian had come here for Roxanne. Although she had a rough idea, she still wanted to hear it from Lucian. However, she never thought she would go over the line. Looking at Lucian's icy cold expression, Aubry panicked and apologized while keeping her composure. "I am sorry. You must have your reason to stay here." After that, she asked tentatively, "When do you plan to leave? Maybe we can leave together if our aiming matches." Lucian lifted his gaze and glanced at Caden. "Mr. Farwell, I've bought the plane tickets," Caden said reverently. Luckily, a first-class seat was left when Caden received the instruction to buy a plane ticket. "All right, pack up my luggage and prepare to leave." Lucian rose to his feet. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with a hand in his pocket and looked down. He thought he could catch up with the two if he left right away and wondered how Roxanne would react when she saw him. A look of suspicion flashed in Aubry's eyes when she heard that. "I've just arrived, and Lucian is leaving now." Aubry was sure that Roxanne wasn't planning to leave earlier. "Did I overthink it? Is Lucian really here for a business trip?" At that thought, Aubry plucked up her courage and asked, "Are you planning to leave now? Let's go back together. If you're not in a rush, I can settle my things quickly. Just wait for me for a while." Lucian acted as though he didn't hear Aubry's invitation. He said coldly, "I have done my job, so I have no reason to stay here any longer. Maybe you should get back to work. Since you're busy, don't loiter around here." After he said that, he retracted his gaze from her. Aubry stood at the entrance in a daze and took a while to register what was happening. With tightly clenched fists, Aubry turned around and strode away after she saw that Lucian had no intention of continuing their conversation. After Aubry left, she saw two housekeepers opening Roxanne's hotel room. Her heart sank when she saw that, and she walked over quickly. "Where's the guest in this room?" "She has checked out," the housekeeper replied. "Checked out?" Aubry looked as if she got struck by lightning. Earlier, Lucian had said he was going to leave too. Aubry had wondered why he was leaving so abruptly. T turned out that it was because Roxanne had left. She had tried so hard to find out the answer from Lucian. However, she got the answer from the housekeepers instead. Lucian had gone on a business trip to Baldridge abruptly and had stayed in this kind of hotel. Moreover, he had been staying right next to Roxanne's room. And now, he even asked Caden to buy him a plane ticket as soon as Roxanne left. This was all because he was following Roxanne. Suddenly, Aubry felt her vision going dark, and she couldn't calm down for a long while. Although she had speculated this earlier, she still couldn't accept the reality. When she heard it herself, Aubry recovered from the shock. After a while, the first thing she did was check the flight schedule back to Harrington through her phone. According to the time when Roxanne and Lucian left the hotel, she reckoned they must have bought the earliest flight ticket. However, the tickets for the earliest flight were sold out by the time she opened the site. Aubry's face was ashen as soon as she saw there were no tickets left. With gritted teeth, she put her phone back in her pocket. This moment, Lucian opened the door and walked out of his room. Aubry opened her mouth and was about to speak. Lucian raised his eyes and glanced in Aubry's direction, but as if he didn't see her, he quickly withdrew his gaze. Aubry couldn't speak up even after the two entered the elevator. Chapter 242. An hour later, on a plane to Harrington, Roxanne frowned slightly when she saw the man boarding the plane. She thought Lucian didn't really mean it. After all, they bought the tickets in a hurry. Besides, when she had bought the tickets, she saw only 3 remaining tickets. After Larry and Roxanne bought their tickets, there was only one ticket left. Therefore, little did she know that Lucian would buy the last ticket coincidentally. A trace of regret flashed across her eyes. The moment Roxanne saw the man getting closer and closer to he, just now, she planned to go back by herself, so she only bought a ticket for herself first. Since she and Larry bought their tickets separately, they didn't get to sit together, and the seat for the person who had the last ticket was right beside hers. Initially, Roxanne didn't expect that Lucian's seat would be beside hers, so the thought of changing seats with another person didn't cross her mind. Currently, she was at the window seat, and the man had walked up to her, blocking her only escape route. If she stood up and requested to have her seat changed, her intention to avoid him would become obvious. While she was still hesitating, the man had already sat down beside her, her forehead furrowed. Roxanne snapped out of her reverie and stayed in her seat, as that was the only choice she had. Before Lucian got on the plane, he was still wondering where Roxanne would be seated. To his pleasant surprise, the moment he boarded that plane, he saw the woman next to his seat. Noticing her reluctance to sit with him, Lucian smirked meaningfully and uttered, "As I said, I also bought a ticket for this flight. Unfortunately, you and Mr. Morrison didn't even want to wait for me, Miss Jarvis." Roxanne turned her head away from him and gazed at the scenery outside the window, ignoring him. Since she couldn't escape, she planned to treat this man as though he was a stranger and fall back to Harrington uneventfully. However, the person beside her didn't see eye to eye with her on that. "I'm a bit curious, Miss Jarvis. Why did you leave in a hurry? I didn't hear you mentioning going back to Harrington when we had breakfast." Lucian's voice rang from the side, hissed an unfathomable, scowling. Roxanne turned over and answered him coldly with another question. "Mr. Farwell, I'm also curious, why would you leave your fiancé behind in Baldridge and go back to Harrington by yourself?" At the mention of his fiancé, Lucian's gaze darkened. She pretended that she hadn't noticed the change in his expression as she continued. "Mr. Farwell, you're going to get married, so you should spend more time with your fiancé at this critical juncture." When Lucian was about to reply to her, the woman next to him took out a small blanket and covered herself with it up to her face. She then turned her back to him and lay down. Through the blanket, her muffled voice sounded, "I'm tired. I need to rest. Mr. Farwell, please be quiet." With that, she closed her eyes, and Lucian could only see the back of her head. In the end, Lucian stopped striking up a conversation with her as he stared quietly at the woman beside him, judging from the time Roxanne left and the words she had said just now. Lucian was sure that her abrupt departure had something to do with Aubry. However, he couldn't figure out how Roxanne viewed his relationship with Aubry. If Elm really just a stranger to Roxanne, why is she so hostile toward my rumored fiancé? Roxanne had no idea what he was ruminating about. Ash continued to pretend to be asleep. She originally wanted to sleep all the way to Harrington in order to avoid the person next to her. To her dismay, even with her back to him, she could feel that the man's prickly gaze was on her. Chapter 243. Making her Unibledo doze off. A long while had passed, but the man's gaze was still fixed on her. Irritated, Roxanne knitted her brows and raised her hand to pull the blanket up again to have her entire face covered, attempting to reduce the sense of oppression she felt due to the man's unrelenting gaze. However, since she still had her eyes closed, she failed to tug the blanket up when she raised her hand. Instead, the blanket fell, sensing that the weight on her had slide off. Roxanne froze for a moment as she wondered if she should open her eyes and pick up the blanket, but when she thought of her current situation, she feared that the atmosphere would get even more awkward if she let the man know that she had been playing possum. On the other hand, without the blanket, she would feel even more uneasy due to his piercing stare. While she was still at a loss, the person seated next to her moved, causing Roxanne to tense up. Immediately, she had no idea what he was about to do. Moments later, a familiar scent wafted into her nose. With all her might, she forced herself to calm down and not let her eyelids tremble. Soon, the blanket that had fallen off was draped over her again. Lucian's movements were gentle. It was as though he was worried he would wake her up. After draping the blanket over her body, he even arranged the blanket nicely for her. Roxanne assumed that he would back off after that. But to her surprise, he did not. Even when she had her eyes closed, she could still feel his gaze lingering on her face. What is he looking at? Just as she couldn't help but open her eyes, Lucian averted his gaze. With that, the pressure Roxanne felt disappeared instantly, and she heaved a sigh of relief. And what followed was a sense of gloominess. For some reason, she recalled the day when she was down with fever. When I was fast asleep that day, Lucian probably had taken care of me like how he did just now. This is something I wouldn't even dare to imagine in the past, but I didn't expect it would happen to me so easily today. She had never thought that the man, who wouldn't even spare her a glance in the past, would take care of her so thoughtfully and meticulously. It had happened 6 years ago. She would have been so glad that she would smile in her dream, but now that she had been through all those, she did not feel happy at all. On the contrary, she only felt troubled. There are things that come too late in life. It's so late that I don't even need them anymore. Roxanne scoffed inwardly as that thought crossed her mind. Sitting at the side, Lucian had been staring at Roxanne for a long while. Similarly, his heart was troubled. 6 years ago, Roxanne went missing, and he spent a lot of time and effort to find her. At long last, she was found, but she was no longer looking at him the way she used to be 6 years ago. Lucian couldn't even decipher how he felt when he met her again for the first time. He was both surprised and furious, but the strongest feeling he had at that moment was regret. He regretted he didn't stop her back then, which caused her to avoid him like the plague. Their seats were now next to one another, but Shep pretended to be asleep to avoid sparing him a glance. Lucian frowned as he cast a complicated look at the woman beside him. She probably didn't know what she looked like when she was asleep, much less know how different she was now from it. Even when he was putting the blanket on her just now, Roxanne obviously went stiff momentarily. Needless to say, he noticed all the signs, but since she wanted to do that, Lucian wouldn't expose her. Sensing that Lucian was staring at her again, Roxanne furrowed her brows slightly. She groped for the edge of the blanket and pulled it, her head no longer caring if he would notice that she was faking being asleep. With that, Lucian's burning gaze was blocked. Chapter 244. It wasn't until the plane landed that Roxanne removed the blanket. Harrington sat up calmly with a pair of clear eyes. Lucian turned his head over and glanced at her. He was not surprised to see that she didn't look groggy at all. A hint of self-deprecation surged in his heart, but unthemed, he didn't say a word. Even with how reserved he was now, Roxanne wanted to avoid him. If he crossed the line again, he was worried that she would hide at a place where he couldn't reach. Just like 6 years ago, it had been difficult to find her, so Lucian did not want to scare her away. The person sitting next to her didn't budge. Roxanne frowned, but she didn't urge him to move aside. When almost of the people got off the plane, Lucian Rosato his feet placidly. The two then got off the plane one after the other. Meanwhile, Larry and Caden were already waiting for them outside. While they were on the plane just now, Larry saw Lucian sitting next to Roxanne, but the plane had taken off, so he couldn't do anything about it. Upon seeing Lucian, Larry merely greeted the former out of courtesy, then turned to look at Roxanne. You don't have a car? I'll send you back, Roxanne replied, with a smile. Thanks, Larry. As she spoke, she completely ignored the man beside her and strode over to Larry's side, seeing the woman, who had been giving him the cold shoulder, smile at another man. Lucian was naturally displeased and extended his hand to grab her wrist. The smile on Roxanne's face gradually faded as she turned around to face Lucian. Mr. Farwell, what else do you want? Lucian gazed into her eyes, but he couldn't find any traces of amicability in them. What he found were only distance and distress. Realizing that she didn't want to communicate with him at all, Lucian tightened his grip on her unthinkingly. Let me send you. Upon hearing that, Roxanne forced a smile placidly. No need, Mr. Farwell. You're a busy man. I'd better not waste your time. Besides, I'm closer to Larry than you, Mr. Farwell. I won't feel burdened if Larry sends me home. Lucian's expression turned gloomy instantly, although Roxanne had repeatedly emphasized that they were just strangers to one another. It was the first time she said in front of him that she was closer to another man. Turning a blind eye to the change in his expression, Roxanne looked at the hand gripping hers, then glanced around and noticed that they had attracted the attention of numerous onlookers. Mr. Farwell, thank you for your kind offer. If there's nothing else, let go of me. Now, the rumors of us dating will spread. I don't want Miss Pearson to misunderstand our relationship. At the mention of Aubry, Lucian loosened his grip on Roxanne. Because of Aubry, his mother had had serious conversations with him, and it even caused trouble for Roxanne. Lucian didn't want to bring any trouble to her life because of himself. However, Roxanne surmised that he relented because he cared about his relationship with Aubry. Roxanne couldn't help but feel a hint of irony in her heart. Since he cares so much about Aubry, why did he pester me now and again? Not wishing to dwell on that matter, Roxanne shook off his hand and walked over to Larry. Let's go. Larry bobbed his head before nodding to Lucian out of courtesy and leading Roxanne out. As Lucian watched the two leave side by side, the temperature around him turned colder. All the while, Caden stood silently at the side. When he saw that Roxanne had entered Larry's car, Caden turned around to look at his employer, feeling nervous. It wasn't until Larry's car left that Caden spoke tentatively. Mr. Farwell, we should go too. Lucian hummed a response.